right, so today, we're going deep, really deep, into a case most people have heard of, but maybe not all the details. I'm talking about the Unabomber.
Yeah, it's one of those stories that sticks with you.
It really is. I
Yeah.
mean, everyone remembers that FBI sketch, right?
Right.
The hooded figure. It's like this image burned into our collective memory.
It became this symbol, right? Almost like a modern boogeyman.
Exactly. But today, we're doing more than just rehashing the headlines. We're going beyond the surface.
Yeah, and getting in some pretty dark territory.
We are. Because this case, it's more than just a true crime story. It's about trying to understand how someone, a real person, goes from being this brilliant mind to becoming, well, a terrorist.
And let's be clear up front, we're not here to condone or justify what Ted Kaczynski did.
Absolutely not.
His actions were horrific. 17 years of bombings, 3 people dead, 23 injured.
Yeah, it was calculated terror.
Right. But what we're trying to do is unpack how someone with so much potential, someone who graduated Harvard at 16, got his PhD by 25, how could someone like that end up on this path?
Yeah, it's the question that haunts this whole case. What went wrong? Where was the turning point? So let's start at the beginning. Ted Kaczynski was clearly a child prodigy.
Oh, absolutely. He was brilliant, no question about it. But there's this theory, and it's a controversial one, about his time at Harvard.
You're talking about that psychological study.
Yeah, the one led by Professor Henry Murray. It's been the subject of debate for years.
Okay, so for those who don't know, what was so controversial about this study?
Well, the methods were intense, to say the least. We're talking about prolonged interrogation sessions designed to stress the participants, to push them to their limits.
And this was all in the name of research.
Supposedly, yeah. They were trying to understand things like personality and resilience, but critics argue that the study crossed ethical lines.
And Kaczynski was a subject in this study.
He was, as a young undergraduate, and some believe that this experience, especially at that formative age, may have left lasting scars.
It makes you wonder, right? How could anyone come out of something like that unscathed?
Right. And you have to consider the context, too. This was the Cold War, a time of intense paranoia and suspicion.
So you've got this brilliant young man, already potentially vulnerable, being subjected to these stressful, maybe even traumatic psychological experiments in this climate of fear and distrust.
It's a recipe for, well, it's hard to say, but it's certainly a piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, and then there's the sudden shift in his life. He lands this prestigious job as the youngest assistant professor at Berkeley.
Right, he's on this trajectory. Seems like he's going to be a star in the academic world.
And then, boom, 2 years later, he resigns. Just walks away from it all. What happened?
Well, that's where the Montana chapter begins. In 1971, Kaczynski drops off the grid. He moves to this remote cabin, no electricity, no running water. He's deliberately isolating himself from the world he's come to reject.
It's like he's trying to escape modern society altogether. And his journals from this period are fascinating, even disturbing.
Oh, absolutely. You can see this growing disillusionment, this deepening anger and frustration with the direction of society.
He's not just against technology. He sees it as the root of all evil.
Right. He blames technology for everything from environmental destruction to the loss of individual freedom. He sees it as this force that's dehumanizing us, controlling us.
And what's striking is that some of his criticisms, especially about the way technology can be used to manipulate and control people, they resonate with some thinkers and activists today. Not that they condone his actions, of course.
Of course not. Violence is never the answer. But there's a certain, I don't know, a prescience to some of his critiques.
Like he was tapping into this unease that was bubbling under the surface, an unease that's maybe even more pronounced today.
Yeah, I think that's part of what makes his story so compelling, so unsettling, because it forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about ourselves, about the world we've created.
And it all comes to a head in 1978. That's when Kaczynski acts on his anger, sending his first bomb to a professor at Northwestern University.
It was the beginning of a terrifying chapter.
And a mystery that would grip the nation for nearly 2 decades.
17 years of fear, of uncertainty. Who was this Unabomber?
For a long time, no one knew. He was meticulous, a ghost, leaving virtually no trace.
It was one of the largest manhunts in U.S. history, and for years, Kaczynski outsmarted everyone. But then, something shifts.
1995. He sends this 35,000-word manifesto, Industrial Society and Its Future, to newspapers. It's basically his entire philosophy laid bare for the world to see.
It was a gamble and a dangerous one. Imagine giving a platform to a terrorist.
But it was also a turning point, because that's what ultimately led to his capture. It was Kaczynski's own brother, David, who recognized the writing, the ideas in that manifesto.
It must have been a heart-wrenching realization.
To know that your own brother was responsible for so much pain, so much fear. But David made the incredibly difficult decision to contact the FBI.
It was a decision that likely saved lives.
And in 1996, the FBI raids Kaczynski's remote cabin. What they find inside is chilling. Bomb-making materials, detailed journals, and an original copy of that manifesto. It was the end of the line for the Unabomber.
A relief for so many, but it didn't erase what had happened. And then there's the question of his ideas, that manifesto, the legacy he left behind. That's a conversation that's still ongoing today.
And that's what we'll pick up next time. Join us as we delve into Kaczynski's trial, the complexities of his philosophy, and explore the complicated legacy he left behind. Last time, we left off with the FBI closing in on Kaczynski's cabin. And, you know, it's kind of hard to believe that this is where things end for the Unabomber, but it's where it really gets interesting in a lot of ways.
Oh, for sure. I mean, just because they captured him doesn't mean that, it all just went away. You can't erase the impact of what he did.
Exactly. 3 families dealing with this unimaginable loss. And then there's the ripple effect of his ideas,
Right.
That manifesto. It's like this dark echo that just keeps on going.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the trial. Kaczynski actually wanted to represent himself, which, knowing what we do now, isn't all that surprising, right?
No, I mean, this is a man who rejected, every system of authority. So it kind of makes sense.
This was a guy who saw himself as above the law, even with all that evidence stacked against him.
He really did.
But he eventually accepted a plea deal, I guess, to avoid the death penalty.
Yeah.
And that brings us to 1998. Kaczynski pleads guilty to all charges and is sentenced to, well, life in prison. No possibility of parole. He ended up spending the rest of his life, until he died in 2023, in solitary confinement at that Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado. It's just crazy to think, from searching for freedom in the wilderness to being locked up in the most secure prison in America.
It's kind of a tragic, irony in a way.
It really is. But here's the thing. Even though Kaczynski's gone, his story, it's not over, is it?
No, not at all. He becomes this cautionary tale, this
Right.
reminder of what can happen when brilliance gets mixed up with extremism and isolation.
Right.
But then there's the other side of it, too. He sparks this whole debate about technology and its role in society that, well, it's more relevant now than ever.
Right. Because on one hand, you've got this convicted terrorist, but then some of what he wrote in that manifesto, I mean, especially his criticisms of industrial society, they actually resonate with people today. Even folks who completely reject the violence, you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's like, how do you make sense of that?
Exactly.
I think the key is separating, the message from the messenger.
Right.
We can recognize that there are these legitimate concerns about technology and how it's used.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean we endorse violence or terrorism. Kaczynski's actions were horrific, plain and simple. But his writing does kind of force us to look at some uncomfortable truths about, well, the world we've created.
Like his extremism, as awful as it was, made people pay attention,
It did.
To the issues he was raising, even if they didn't agree with his solutions. Think about it. This manifesto, it's dense, it's rambling at times, but it's this critique of technology, and it's found an audience. I mean, there are environmentalists, there are anti-globalization activists, even like tech critics today who are engaging with his ideas.
Yeah, and that's what makes this whole case so fascinating. You can't just dismiss him as, a madman.
No.
His ideas, however flawed in how he acted on them, they tap into real anxieties. Anxieties about the environment, about losing control, about losing our individuality in a world that's so dominated by technology. And I think a lot of people share those anxieties.
Yeah, it's like he was picking up on this growing unease.
Yeah.
That maybe, just maybe, all this progress, it doesn't always lead to a better future.
Yeah.
Like there can be consequences.
Yeah.
And that's a conversation that, well, we just can't ignore.
No, you can't. And I think that's the real challenge of Kaczynski's legacy is how do we take the valid concerns he raised, however distorted by his violence, and actually turn them into something positive? How do we channel them into constructive dialogue and action?
Yeah, because we've talked about his life, his crimes, his trial. But what do we do with this story, this complex, this disturbing story? How do we ensure that technology, it serves humanity, not the other way around?
Well, I think it starts with awareness. We need to we need to be informed about the technologies that are being developed.
Okay.
Understand the benefits, right? But the risks too. We can't just be passive consumers.
Yeah.
Clicking I agree without actually understanding what it is we're agreeing to.
Right. And we need to be critical thinkers.
We
You
did.
got to be able to question assumptions, to recognize bias, to be willing to engage in these thoughtful discussions, even when they're hard.
Especially when they're hard. We are bombarded with information these days. I mean, especially online.
Yeah.
It's crucial to be able to figure out, well, what's credible, to evaluate different perspectives, to form our own opinions, informed opinions.
So, like, what does that actually look like? I mean, what can our listeners do, starting today, to be more, I guess, mindful, more intentional about how they interact with technology?
Well, first, be curious. Don't just accept technology, as it is.
Yeah.
Ask questions. How does this work?
Yeah.
Who is this benefiting? What could go wrong? Second, be really picky about where you get your information.
Okay.
Don't just get your news from, social media or whatever. Seek out different viewpoints. Read articles.
Yeah.
Listen to podcasts like this one.
And don't be afraid to speak up,
Yeah.
right? If you see something that just doesn't feel right, a new technology that raises red flags, don't stay silent. Talk to your friends, your family, your colleagues. Write to your elected officials. Make your voice heard.
Exactly, because the future of technology isn't like set in stone. It's a work in progress, and we all play a role in shaping it.
Yeah, we've been talking about being more like aware when it
Right.
comes to technology.
Yeah.
More discerning, But I keep thinking about that big question. Is there a point where all this progress, all this innovation, it just comes at too high a cost? I mean, it's almost like Kaczynski, even though he was so wrong in his actions, was trying to warn us about something,
Yeah, it's a question that just doesn't go away. It makes you think, can we really separate the man from the message? You know what I mean? Because his actions were they were horrific. There's no getting around that. But some of the stuff you read about, particularly about how technology can be used to dehumanize us, to control us, it feels even more relevant today.
It really does. I mean, look around. Artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, even the metaverse. These aren't just, sci-fi fantasies anymore. They're real things happening right now. They come with all these ethical questions that, we just haven't really figured out yet.
Right, and it's so easy to get caught up in all the excitement of it all, the new gadgets, the new possibilities. It's dazzling. But we've got to step back sometimes and ask ourselves, what are we giving up? What are we sacrificing in the name of progress?
Yeah, it's like that saying, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. We're seeing all the benefits of these technologies, but we're also seeing the downsides. People losing their jobs, privacy being eroded, even our thoughts and behaviors being manipulated by algorithms. It's kind of scary when you think about it.
It is, and I think that's where Kaczynski's story, as dark as it is, can serve as a warning, a reminder that we just can't blindly accept every new technology without thinking about what it might mean, what the consequences might be. We have to be active, engaged, shaping the future, not just being shaped by it.
So how do we do that? How do we make sure that technology is a force for good? Not a tool for control and destruction. How do we find that balance?
It's tough, but I think it starts with each of us taking responsibility. We need to learn about these technologies, how they work, who controls them, what the potential impact could be. It's not always easy to find that information, but it's out there.
So it's really about asking those hard questions. Who's benefiting from this? Who might be harmed? Does this make us better, as humans? Or does it take away our freedom, our privacy? And then, based on the answers, we have to actually do something.
You got it. It might mean supporting companies, organizations that are trying to do things the right way, developing these technologies ethically. It might mean pushing for laws, regulations that protect our rights, our privacy in this digital age. Or it might just be choosing to opt out of some things,
Right.
certain technologies that just don't sit right with us.
It's about making choices. Conscious choices, not just going along with whatever the tech industry is selling us.
Yeah. It's about taking back some control, in a world that feels more and more shaped by algorithms and AI. It's about making sure technology serves us, not the other way around.
That's a powerful thought. And it kind of brings us back to something you were saying earlier about being critical thinkers. It's not just about being aware. It's about being able to really think about these things, to talk about them, even when it's hard. Even when we don't agree.
You're right. We've got to be willing to listen to each other, to see things from different perspectives, to be open to changing our minds.
It's about creating a space, a culture where we can actually have these conversations, respectful conversations, without all the fear-mongering and the easy answers.
Because, the future of technology, it's not preordained.
Yeah.
It really is a reflection of our values, our choices, what we want the world to look like.
So as we're wrapping up here, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from all this, from this whole deep dive?
Hmm. Don't be afraid to question things, to challenge the status quo, to imagine a different future. The Unabomber story, it's dark, it's a reminder of what can happen when technology is misused, but it's also a call to action, an invitation to create something better, to shape a future where technology empowers us, all of us.
It reminds us that we're not just along for the ride, you know. We have a say, we have choices to make, and we have responsibility to create a future that reflects, well, the best of humanity. So let's do that. Let's choose wisely. Well,
If you enjoyed this video and want to dive deeper into more cases like this one, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to like the video if you found the story compelling, and share it with your friends and family who might be interested in true crime and mysteries. By subscribing, you'll stay up to date with all our latest content and join a growing community of curious minds exploring the most fascinating cases. Click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything.